There could soon also be fewer places for homeless people to seek shelter outside.
The city already bans overnight sleeping or camping on public property, and now a proposed state bill could go even further. WECT's Rachel Hawley talked with leaders of Good Shepherd Center, which is a homeless services provider, and they said adding regulations might look good on the outside, but it may have unintended consequences on the inside.
That's right, Fran. They say statewide restrictions can actually make it harder to connect people to help.
Proposed North Carolina bill could make a huge impact on homeless people here in Wilmington. The bill would ban what lawmakers call unauthorized housing in public spaces, including limits near homes, businesses, and schools. Service providers worry it shifts the focus from solutions to punishments.
So far, states that have these kinds of things in place haven't shown any more progress than other communities.
Providers say becoming homeless could be as simple as an increase in rent. And with shelters already stretched thin, they worry people who are close to getting back on their feet could be pushed further out of reach.
Past experience leaves providers concerned that sometimes these kinds of measures have unintended consequences, and they actually take us further from reducing homelessness than, of course, was intended.
Advocates say criminalizing where someone sleeps doesn't address the root issue of the problem, and that the long-term fix is affordable housing.
The one thing that does the most to prevent homelessness is an adequate supply of affordable housing. And by the same token, it is impossible to help people up and out of that situation when we don't have affordable places for them to move to.
Those closest to the situation say the focus should be on finding places for people to live, instead of telling them where they can't go.
For now, Wilmington's ordinance remains in place, and the statewide bill still needs approval from the House before heading over to Governor Stein. Rachel Hawley, WECT News.